Okay, I had John ask you the question, what is the first church you remember attending? And what I thought is maybe you would talk about that with each other. I don't know if that happened or not. But the bigger question that I want to start with today is, how have your church experiences shaped you? How many of you have been going to church your whole life? You've been to church from the very beginning, okay? How many of you started church sometime other than from the very beginning, okay? A bunch of you. This is an interesting question. How many of you, this is the only church you've ever attended? Is there anybody? All right, we got some kids who were born here, literally born here. So pretty cool. Church experiences can shape us in a lot of ways, good or bad. When I was talking about this with my team this week, Pastor John immediately went back to like grade school age, and he remembers the church he was brought up in. The pastor was always asking for more money. I've never heard of this before. I think this might be a brilliant idea. You tell me. The pastor would periodically declare that this is double tithe month. Okay, laughter, probably, I don't know. And John says he remembers one particular year, the double tithe month lasted all the way from April to August. And that did not set well with him. So church experiences can have positive impact on us. They can have negative impacts on us. And today I want to start by just sharing with you a little bit about how my church experiences shaped me. And then we're going to get into what I want to talk about today. But so much of my life has been spent in church, and these experiences have shaped me. I was one of those people that was born in church. I never asked my parents. I suspect I probably went to church the first Sunday after I was born. We were those kinds of people. We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. There was youth group. There was quiz team. I was in church all the time. And I started my life living in Great Falls, and we attended a little church called Central Assembly of God in Great Falls. Now, this church, when I was growing up, was a very traditional Assemblies of God church. And when I say it was a traditional Assemblies of God, we had a culture that was unlike other traditional churches. Some of you have been raised Catholic, and so tradition for you means one thing. Some of you were raised Methodist. Tradition probably means... Tradition in an Assemblies of God church just means a lot of pretty weird stuff was going on. And every single week, there was the same little old lady with her hair wrapped around her head in a braid that gave a message in tongues every single Sunday at the same point in the service every single Sunday. And then the same person gave an interpretation of the tongues every single Sunday. And to me, when I was like in middle school and I kind of wanted my friends from school to come, there was no way I'm going to invite my friends to come to this church because it was just so weird. And everything was the same every single Sunday. We sang 3 songs out of the hymnal, 2 songs out of the chorus book. It was before we even had projectors and all that kind of stuff. But it was 3 and 2. And don't you dare do 2 and 3 because we do 3 and 2, okay? And it was very traditional. And to this day, I have an aversion to anything that feels traditional for tradition's sake. That's just how that experience has affected me. So the song we sang this morning, Break Down the Walls of All My Tradition, that song resonates with me because I don't like tradition much. Now, some of you might have a completely different feeling about tradition. I'm just telling you how it affected me. It's just kind of how I am. Now, I grew up in that church, graduated from high school, and my next stop was in Seattle, Washington. I went to college in Seattle, and I became a part of a very different church. It was Eastside Foursquare Church in the Seattle area. Now, this was the first time, when I got involved at Eastside Foursquare, it was the first time I ever heard a pastor talk about the mission of the church being local. The church I grew up in, our church was like a cloister. We were a refuge from the evils of the world. Our pastor at Eastside Foursquare Church said, we are missionaries to the people of Seattle. And he would share with us all the time how we were living in the statistically most unreached community in all of the United States. There were fewer people going to church in Seattle at that time than anywhere else in the United States. And he said, friends, we have got to be missionaries to the people who don't know Jesus in our community. And that church had a very deep impact on me. And if you've been attending Connect for any length of time, you'll hear me say all the time, I'm a missionary to Montanans. Because I know we've got a ton of people in Bozeman, Belgrade, Three Forks, Manhattan. We've got a ton of people in this area who don't know Jesus, that need to know Jesus. And I believe I'm a missionary. Chris is a missionary. I hope that if this is your church home, you have adopted this view that you're a missionary to Montanans along with me. That idea was fostered in this wonderful church experience I had in Seattle. From there, when I graduated from college, I moved to Boise, and that's where I met my wife. I rescued her from that awful city, and just kidding. Oh, haters gonna hate. I guess I started the hate, didn't I? I got my first ministry job out of Bible college in Boise at a very large church. Oddly enough, I grew up in Central Assembly. I took my first job in Boise at a church also called Central Assembly. And some of you that are my age or older, you may remember this church or the pastor of this church. When I got there, the pastor had been dead for 2 years, and his son had become the pastor. But it was a tragedy because their senior leader had been in a counseling session, had a massive heart attack, and dropped dead in the middle of a counseling session. If you can imagine how awful that would be. But it was especially traumatic for this church because this leader's name was Roland Buck. Some of you may remember that name. In the 1970s, Roland Buck had had visitations of angels. And it was well documented. He wrote a couple of books, and he had taught extensively about the message that the Lord was sending to the church through these angels. He was on the Christian television networks of the day. He had become very, very famous, and the church had grown to a very large size. And I was hired on as their music director at this large church I think it was just 2 years after he had died. And what had happened was when he died, the leaders of that church asked his son to take the helm of the church. And Ted was only 32 years old when he became the senior leader of a very large church, following his dad, who was a legend. So you can imagine this was a very tumultuous period for this church, right? Trying to figure out what do we do without this very charismatic, very influential leader. And it was a very difficult season for all of us. What I discovered was that really this senior leader, Roland Buck, didn't know that he was going to be taken home unexpectedly. He hadn't really prepared any kind of a succession plan. They didn't have leaders prepared. His son, at 32 years of age, was selling luxury cars. And his wife liked their lifestyle. And when they became pastor and pastor's wife, it was difficult for them, and it was difficult for the whole church. So one of the things that has done in my life, how that's influenced me, is I am always looking for leaders. And I've always got an eye to developing leaders. I believe that leadership and leadership development is so, so important in the church. And so that's a focus. To the degree that we have a staff member who works for us part-time, Cameron Robinson, is in charge of leadership development at Connect Church. He moved away to Texas a few months ago, and he was so effective, I said, Cam, will you please work remotely? And he said yes. So he and his wife attend a church in Temple, Texas, and they're online every week at Connect, and they're still part of our staff because it's that important to me that we are always developing leaders. Now, I was just in Boise a couple of years, and then I moved back to Montana. I say quite often that God tricked me into coming back to Great Falls, Montana. It wasn't my plan, and there's a whole backstory to that. But I ended up back in Great Falls and ended up as a staff member at the church that I grew up in. It doesn't happen to very many people. By the time I came back to Great Falls, I'd been away for about 10 years. In that 10 years period of time, the pastor that I grew up under had moved on, and there was a young man named Alan Warnicki who was the new senior pastor at Central Assembly in Great Falls, and he had taken on as his responsibility the need to transition this very traditional Assembly of God church into something that would be modern and missional and could reach the community. And one of the things I learned from Alan is when you're transitioning a church from old and traditional and stuck in its ways to something that can be new and flexible and outreach oriented, you have to go slow and you have to be deliberate and you have to keep explaining why we're doing this. Why did we take away the choir loft? Well, there's no choir to sing in the choir loft. We could use it for something else. And I worked with Alan for 16 years, and I watched him very carefully and deliberately turn this ship. And when it was time for him to move on to a new ministry role, he and I had talked about potentially I stepping into the senior role at that church. And after 16 years of watching him work and move very slowly and deliberately, I knew that is not my jam. That's not what I do. And also during that period of time, I'd gone to seminary and I was studying Christian leadership, and I was learning about all kinds of new models of church leadership and church structure, and especially the missional church movement of churches that believe that they exist to reach the members of their community. And so after serving in Great Falls for 16 years, Chris and I decided to come to Bozeman and start a church from scratch, and that is Connect Church right here in Bozeman. It's been 17 years. And if I was going to describe the character of Connect Church, I would say that for 17 years we have been leading through the lens of biblical values. We lead through the lens of biblical values, which I believe is so important. And that's why for these last 10 weeks I've been teaching this series called This Is Who We Are. And today is the last message in this teaching series. Next week, we're going to go on to something new. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I've been sharing with you hashtag This Is Who We Are. It's been a message series about the values of Connect that inform everything that we do. And I've shared with you that I believe that every once in a while it's important because values are front and center for us. Every once in a while, I believe that it's important for us to come back and remind ourselves that this is who we are. If you've got a note card, I listed out the 9 values that I've taught on so far in this series. I've talked about we are family, that we're not just strangers who get together every Sunday, but one of the values of Connect Church is building significant relationships and beginning to understand that we are brothers and sisters in the family of God. I've shared with you that we are getting to know Jesus. This is one of our big values. So many Christians know a lot about Jesus, but they don't really know him. Here at Connect, we're really getting to know Jesus on a relational level. One of our values is that we are on a rescue mission. Jesus said after he had come into the house of the tax collector Zacchaeus, Jesus said, I came to seek and save people who are lost. And I believe that as connectors, we are joining Jesus on that rescue mission that's very important to us. One of the values that I've talked about the 4th week is that we're listening to God speak. We say it all the time. God is always speaking, and we're learning how to hear him speak. We're learning how to share what God is saying with one another. One of the big values that I hold very dear, and it's a value of Connect, is that we make the Bible understandable. The Bible is a record of people through the centuries who have had experiences with God, and they wrote them down, and it's been passed down to us. It's extraordinary how very accurate the Bible is historically as we look back. But sometimes for a lot of people it's difficult to understand the Bible because it's an ancient document that was written to different people than us in a different culture than us. So one of the things we work very hard at is making sure that the Bible is understandable. We're a generous church. We give a lot of money away. We empower leaders, both men and women. If you weren't here for the week that Cheryl Taylor spoke, it was while I was recovering from my surgery, and I asked my friend Cheryl Taylor to come and talk about the biblical reasons why we believe that women are empowered to be leaders and not just men. If you didn't hear that message, it was awesome. You can go back to the podcast and pick that one up. And then the last couple of weeks, we talked about we grow together in groups and we all minister together. Everybody has ministry gifts and God calls us all to minister together. This is who we are. These are our values. Now, if I had 3 more weeks, there's 3 more messages I would probably teach in this series, and I might come back to them in the next several months. I would like to share with you that we are worshipers. I loved what Lucas had to share with us this morning about worshiping. Jesus said when they asked him, what's the most important commandment? You remember? He said, the most important commandment is loving God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. Worshiping God is everything we are. It's everything. It's singing, but it's also serving. It's loving people well. It's living in obedience. Worship is such an important part of who we are. If we were going to continue, I'd also love to teach you, and I have in the past, that one of the things we value at Connect is taking off our masks. In lots of churches, there's a high bar of what people like to call holiness. And a lot of times the bar is so high that everybody just pretends to be really holy, and they never really talk about the fact that they're really struggling with some stuff. Here at Connect, we believe that if you confess your sins to one another and you pray for one another, the Bible says you will be healed. And so what we do here is we drop the pretensions and we share honestly who we are and what we're going through, and we minister to one another to help us find healing from addictions and healing from habits and healing from failures, healing from guilt and shame and all this stuff. And it starts when we just get real with one another. It's important. This happens most often in groups, which is one of the reasons I believe in groups so strongly. And then the last one, if I were going to keep going in this series, is we love to laugh here at Connect. The Bible says a cheerful heart is good medicine. It's good medicine. So if I'm silly and I say things to make you laugh, it's because I want you to get some good medicine. And this is who we are. But today, as we wrap up this message, what I want to talk about is why these values matter. Why have I been spending 10 weeks talking about our values when those of you that have been around for a long time, you probably know most of this stuff about Connect? Well, it's because I believe that values are one of the most important things that you can do in selecting a church. And so I have an alternate title for this message. The alternate title is How to Pick a Good Church. Okay? And so if you're looking for a good church and you're visiting Connect for the first time, I want to share with you, we're a church that is values-focused, and I think that keeps us healthy, or at least it keeps us on the track of being and pursuing health. But we're in a season, it's kind of heartbreaking for me, we're in a season in which we've got some connectors who are moving away. Next week, we will say goodbye to Jacob Driesen, one of our worship leaders who just took a new job in Missoula. And so when he told me last week that he was moving to Missoula, the first thing I started talking with him about is how to find a good church. The Cooks are talking about moving to Texas. You're going to kill me, guys. You're going to kill a lot of us when you leave. And Tosh, when you called me to tell me that you were thinking of moving to Texas, what was the first thing I said? How are you going to find a good church? Because it's critically important that you find a healthy church, and I believe you want to find a church that has values. Values are so important. Not all churches have well-articulated values, or not all churches live by the values that they claim to live by. There's a bunch of different churches, and I think this is in your notes. It's up on the screen. There's a number of different church identities, and these are just some that came to my mind. It probably reminds you of a church you know. There's tradition-bound churches. You know what I'm talking about? The church I grew up in was a tradition-bound. These are churches that if it's traditional, that's what we're going to do, and if it hasn't been done for 400 years, by golly, we're not going to start it today. Don't you dare bring a drummer into this church, okay? Tradition-bound churches. There's denominationally loyal churches. These are the churches that are run from the top down, and there's a denominational headquarters somewhere in the Midwest, and they call all the shots, and because we belong to this denomination, that's what we're going to do, and we're going to follow them no matter how irrelevant it might be to our local community. Okay? There's churches like that. There's personality-centered churches. The church that I ministered in for a couple of years in Boise was one of those churches. Very charismatic leaders, very powerful leaders. They draw big crowds. Everything is centered around the personality of the leader. The reason these churches get into trouble sometimes is sometimes the leader will die, or the leader will move on to something new and hasn't prepared the people for his departure. Or one of the things we've seen a lot in the last few decades is some of these very powerful, charismatic personalities fall into moral failure. And it rocks the church, and for a lot of churches, the churches crumble because everything was focused on that personality of that leader. There's market-driven churches. Market-driven churches are the ones that do demographic surveys, and they try to find out what the Christians in their market want, and then they just give them what they want. They don't talk about hard things. There's whole sections of the Bible that they won't even address because they don't want to make people uncomfortable, or they don't want to make people disagree. Market-driven. We had a member of our team, somebody who's no longer here, but we had a member of our team that always had a problem whenever I would teach about some of our Pentecostal values, what the Bible calls speaking in tongues. And I already told you about that in the church I grew up in. I still believe in speaking in tongues. It's very important. It's a biblical principle that has great value to us. And I teach on it because I want us all to understand what it is and what the value of it is. But we had somebody that came from a church that was market-driven, and this person would always say to me, Pastor Russ, you know, I bet only 5% of connectors actually speak in tongues. I don't think anybody really wants to hear about this. She had this perspective that we should be more market-driven, okay? We are a values-focused church. We know what our values are. This is who we are, and everything that we do, everything we talk about, the choices we make, how we spend our money, how we staff our team, filters down through the values of who we are. And I think it's really, really important. And I believe that values matter. Now, you might be asking the question, I don't know if you are, but it's in my mind. What really matters? When it comes to church, what really matters? And there's several things that I think we need to hold very tightly in our church and in any church. If you're ever in a season of life of looking for a church, I want you to think about these things. In fact, I hope you'll tuck these notes into your Bible or into a binder, and you'll come back to this from time to time. I believe that theology matters. Theology really really matters, because if you believe things that are not true, you will make choices that end in destruction. Truth matters. Theology matters. I was thinking about how I could illustrate this. What if I believe that road signs when I'm driving don't apply to me? Some people believe that. And then when you come to that intersection and it says one way going that way, if you make a hard right turn, it's going to end in destruction for you. Okay? Truth matters. Theology matters. And if you believe things that aren't true, something bad is going to happen, or something destructive can happen in your life. Had a really significant conversation this week with a young man. And this was awesome. He had come to my house to work on something, and we've been getting to know each other over the last several months, and he did the work that he needed to do, and then he looked at me and said, "Russ, do you have some time to talk?" And I said, "Yes," and so we just sat down in a chair, and he said, I want to talk to you about some stuff. And we started talking about theology. And this is a young man who's been raised up in a Calvinistic environment. Do you know what Calvinism is? Or Reformed theology? Some of you have been part of Reformed churches. And in this theological environment, based on John Calvin's teaching from 500 years ago, John Calvin started with the belief that God is angry at sin and takes pleasure in punishing sin. That's the bedrock belief of all Calvinistic teaching. And I started talking to this young man and I said, if you believe that, then it's going to affect how you relate to God, and it's going to affect how you relate to other people. And we started talking that through a little bit. Jesus said that the foundational nature of God is what? Do you remember? God is love. This is what Jesus said. He said, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Not that God can't wait for Judgment Day to come so he can squish everybody that he's angry at. Okay? It's a different way of understanding who God is, and it matters because what this young man said, I said, what do you think about God the Father? And what do you think about love? Well, he said, I was raised to believe that Jesus loves everybody, but God's kind of mad at everybody. And I said, so how do you feel about God the Father? He said, well, I'm afraid of him. So if you believe that God, his fundamental nature is that he's just itching to wipe out sinners, you're going to keep him at an arm's distance because we're all pretty aware of how much we've failed. Am I right? If you understand that God is a father who loves his sons and daughters and would do anything to rescue you, you're going to run to the Father and you're going to let Jesus reconcile you to him. And it's not just that, but my experience has been people who believe that fundamental flaw of Calvinism, they also are really unkind to other people that they think aren't good enough. They're so unkind. And so, listen, what you believe works it out. This young man I was talking about, he said, I believe theology works itself out and it's in your fingertips. I've never heard somebody say that before. Isn't that a great way of putting it? What you believe works its way out in your fingertips. In other words, you're going to do what you fundamentally believe. And so theology matters. I want you to know theology matters. It's not the only thing that matters. Let me talk about something else that matters. Culture matters. In churches all over the world, culture matters. And I see two different kinds of church culture that we have to be really honest about. There's a culture of life. There's a culture of life. Life-giving churches. You probably can feel when you begin to attend a church and you get to know people whether a church has a culture of life or not. The Bible says that the tongue, what you say, can bring death or life. and those who love to talk will reap the consequences. Do you know this verse from the book of Proverbs? Another way of putting it, another translation says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Do you know you can speak death words and you can speak life words? And I believe here at Connect, we need to be people who are constantly speaking life into people instead of death. It's a culture of life. One of the other verses that I talk about often in terms of prophecy, 1 Corinthians 14 says, a person who prophesies strengthens others, encourages others, and comforts others. This is just what hearing from God and ministering to other people will do. It's going to give people life. The flip side of a life culture is the culture of condemnation. Some of you probably have been parts of churches who have a culture of condemnation. This is what Jesus said. God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world. Is this good news to anybody? God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. A church culture of condemnation is not what Jesus ever intended. John 10:10, ooh, this is an important verse. I'm going to sit down because this one rocks me. Jesus said this, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I want you to look at that verse on the screen for just a second. Who's the thief? Would you be surprised if I told you that's not who Jesus was talking about? If you read this verse in context, he's talking about people who come into a faith community and start to destroy it through stealing and killing and destruction. These are people who come in and begin to destroy a church from the inside out. They usually have a nature of condemnation. And Jesus is saying in this passage, in John chapter 10, Jesus is saying, watch out for people that have a condemnation culture because they will destroy you. But Jesus came to give us life and abundant life. Do you hear what I'm saying? And so, connectors, we've got to be hanging tightly to a culture of life and not a culture of condemnation. And again, if you're ever out in the place where you're trying to find a church home, find a church that has a culture of life. When we were meeting this week, Emily Wood said, you know, sometimes people have a hard time identifying a church that has a shame culture. Sometimes it's hard to identify a church that has a shame culture. Listen to the way people talk. Are people in the culture that you're a part of saying things like, you know, if you keep doing that, you're going to go straight to hell? It's a shame culture. If people are trying to control other people's behavior with shame and guilt, it's a shame culture. Let's hold tightly to life. And pursuing everything that Jesus calls us to in life abundantly instead of shame and guilt and condemnation. Does that make sense? So theology matters, culture matters. Pastor John mentioned this one. I love this. Generations matter. Generations matter. Listen, churches that have only old people are going to only last until the last old person dies. Okay? Generations matter. Churches that only have young people are going to be missing out on the wisdom of the old. Now, we've got to be investing in the young people of our church. We've got to be investing. We've got to be raising up young leaders constantly if our church is going to have staying power. But we can't just let the old people sit on a shelf somewhere, okay, and admire their pretty silver hair. We've got to lean into the wisdom. We've got to lean into the wisdom of the older generation. We need the generations in our church. It keeps us healthy. Worship matters. And when I say worship, I mean heart, soul, mind, and strength worship. Churches in which worship is just defined by really great music, something happens in that kind of a culture. And if you choose a church because you like the music, that's your primary reason for going to a church. Do you know what's going to happen if all you're focused on is you just got to get those chills? And it needs to sound just like the radio. If that's your focus, your faith is going to become shallow, and you're just going to become a church consumer. Our value at Connect is that we are a family, which means when our worship leader is struggling because of the smoke in the air, and he can't sing with that beautiful tenor that he usually has, we worship anyway, because it's not about Lucas. It's about him. It means when we come to church and realize that the piano player didn't make rehearsal on Thursday and he's hitting some real bad notes. Thank you. I rely on that. I missed rehearsal on Thursday and it was bad. It was a struggle. It wasn't bad, it was a struggle. When you understand what worship really is, that worship is about him and it's not about the music, you know what happens? Your faith deepens instead of having a shallow faith. And your worship becomes a spiritual gift to the Lord instead of about what I feel and what I get out of it. Listen, I know I hammer this probably too often. I am so fed up with church consumers. We're not consumers. We're family, and we're worshipers. Worship matters. But here's what I want you to leave with today. Values matter most. What you value, what you truly value, is what you talk about the most, and it's what you prioritize with your time and your money. Chris and I try to always have this conversation with young couples who are preparing to get married. We ask them, what are your values, or what are your priorities? What is most important to you? And so quite often we'll have young couples make a list of the things that are most important to them. And a lot of times, especially if they're Christian couples and they've been in church for any length of time, they make a list. All the lists look the same. God, family, church, work, right? And then I ask them this question and it always just goes, ooh. I say, listen, if you showed me your budget, will your budget reflect your values? And if you show me your calendar, will your calendar reflect your values? In other words, if you say God is the most important thing in your life, but you never give, is he really your highest value? And if you say your marriage is your highest value or up there on the list, but the only people you ever spend time with are your coworkers and your children, and you never take your wife out on a date, do you really value your wife? Do you hear what I'm saying? Values aren't just what you say, it's how you spend your time and it's how you spend your money. It's what you talk about, it's what you live out. And it's true in church as well. One of the reasons I want to remind us of this is who we are again and again and again and again is because, well, for one thing, I'm reminding myself. I am constantly aligning myself into this is what we value, this is who we are, this is what Connect is. But also, if this is your church home, I want you to fully embrace all of these values because we're in this together and we should all be living this out together. If you missed any of these messages, would you do me a favor? Would you go back and watch any of the messages that you didn't hear? And in fact, I did something really cool this week. I built a whole web page on our website that has all of these messages in order with links to the YouTube videos. And I made invite cards. They're back on the Connection Center that tells people this is who we are. If you have friends who are looking for a church, I'm not asking you to pull people out of other churches. But if you have friends, I know we've got a bunch of people in this community that aren't going to church anywhere. Would you share one of these invite cards with them and say, listen, we're a church that has really significant values and we're pursuing spiritual health by living out our values. Share this with them. Encourage them to watch the videos. What we're learning is a lot of people watch a lot of church videos before they ever visit a church for the first time. This is a tool you can use if you want to invite somebody to connect. But more importantly, I want you to think about, what do we value? What is most important? If I were going to give you the top 3, what are the 3 things we value most? I would say this: we value experiencing God. Now I'm rephrasing the list from our list. But we value really experiencing God, hearing him speak, learning about him through the Bible. We want every person who is a connector to have experiences in which they encounter God. We value the transformation that comes from those kinds of encounters. We believe that Jesus said, I came to give people life and have abundant. Do you know what the word abundant means? It means lots of it. I think the Message is the translation that says, I came to give them more and better life than they ever dreamed of. Okay? This is a life culture here. It's a value for us. And then the third one that I would say is in our top 3 is we value relationships. We're a family. And families take work. Don't raise your hand. Just think about this. Treasure it in your heart. How many of you have funky relationships in your biological family? I said don't raise your hand, Christy Lynn. We all have funky relationships, right? Churches are no different. Relationships are hard. Relationships are a challenge. Sometimes we have people who come to connect and they've been hurt before in church. And they keep everybody at arm's length. And that's okay. If that's you and you're keeping everybody at arm's length, I get it. I understand. I've been hurt. And our fight or flight response, I think there's a third F, isn't there? Freeze. Yeah. Our response to being hurt is sometimes to just build a wall. Okay? I get it because I've been hurt too. But I want to tell you from my experience, every time I invest in relationships in our church family, I'm taking a risk. But 9 times out of 10, it is so worth it. Because the relationships in my life have changed me for the better. Plus, we're all going to spend eternity in Jesus' presence together anyway, so we might as well figure it out on this side. So with that, I want to tell you, groups are starting next Sunday. You cheered so much better for John when he announced it. Next Sunday, I'm starting our new message series called The Jesus Way. We'll start this message series, and at the same time, our groups are going to launch next week. I'm providing a discussion guide for many of our groups, and I'm going to walk through all these groups with you today. Many of our groups will be using the discussion guide that I'm writing. It's not done. Pray for me. I've got a lot to do this week. There are sample discussion guides back there if you want to see what it's looking like at this point. Anyway, we've got 12 groups that are forming. If you have the Connect Church app, this is how you're going to sign up. Let me just walk you through it. Grab your phone. If you've downloaded the app, it's called Church Center. Give me a yup if you've got Church Center. Okay, open up Church Center. It's going to open up on the home page. And down on the bottom, or if you've got an Android device, which I don't know why you would own, but if you've got one of those, it might be somewhere else. Why does that Taylor Swift song just keep going through my head? So touch groups, okay? You got groups open. And then down at the bottom of that page, it says Connection Groups Bozeman. You can touch that, and all of our groups are going to open up there. And this is how you're going to sign up for a group. Now, if you don't have the app or you're technologically challenged, Chris can help you. We'll just write your name down. We'll get you signed up. But I just want to walk through all of the groups. Somehow my list got out of order from the app, so I'm just going to go with my script so that Shane can stay with me. Let me just introduce our group leaders to you. The first one, and I'm going to start with the groups that are doing the Jesus way, and then we'll talk about the groups that are doing something different, okay? Tyler and Courtney Brandt are our first group leaders. They're doing the Jesus way. Tyler and Courtney are right back there in the back. Turn around and look at them. They were waving at you, but nobody saw. There's Tyler and Courtney right back there. Their group is going to meet on Tuesdays from 6:30 to 8, starting September 17th. They live in Spring Hill. They're doing the Jesus way. They have room for 10 people total, and they will be providing hot beverages. All right? Ted and Betty Lang, our group leaders again this semester. They've been leading for a while. Where's Ted and Betty? Right over here, over by the windows. They've been leading a group in their home, but this semester they're joining with the Rembolds. Are the Rembolds here? Not this morning. Rembolds are going to be hosting this group, and they live in Hidden Valley, which is just off of Valley Center. They're meeting on Thursday evenings at 6:30. They have room for 8, and they will provide refreshments. Chris and I, this is in alphabetical order, by the way, just so nobody feels favored. Chris and I are leading our group for newbies. We start over every fall, so if you were in our group before, I'm sorry, you get kicked out. But there's hope for you. I'll get to the hope in just a second. But this is for new. How we define newbies is if you're new to Connect, or if you've never been in our group before, you're invited to join our group. We meet on Wednesdays starting September 18th. We live in Bozeman. We will take as many people as want to sign up for our group. We will pack you in, and we always provide soup and bread. And our co-host is Sarah Cole, and Sarah helps us in all kinds of ways. And so you're invited to join our group if you're a newbie. Kathy Morris has been leading a group for ladies for many years. I saw Kathy's right down here. Wave real Vanna White kind of wave, Kathy, yes. Kathy has a group for ladies that's been meeting for many years, Wednesdays at 9:30 a.m. They meet here in the Hive. They are studying the Jesus way. They have room for more ladies, even if you've never been in the group before. And she invites you to BYOB, which means bring your own beverage. Okay, don't misunderstand. John Rudd is working on starting a group. We don't have all the details yet. John Rudd is going to be leading a group for young adults on Sunday evenings. And they're going to be doing the Jesus way. They will have lots of space. And food is probable, but not guaranteed at this point. And then for those of you that have been in our newbies group before and you got kicked out, Sean and Becky Searle are leading our group, carrying over from last year. And so we're excited about them. They live in Belgrade. That group meets on Mondays at 6:30 p.m. and they have room for 15 altogether. And they're going to provide a meal as well. So that's going to be a great thing. And then Jeff and Julie Vockel right down here with their granddaughter in the middle. Ollie, wave, because you're part of the family. Oh, she is gone. They meet on Thursdays at 6:30. Starting September 19th, they live in the Four Corners area, not far from here. They're doing the Jesus way. You have room for more, yes? and they provide refreshments. So those are all the groups that are doing the Jesus way. Now let me talk about some of the other kinds of groups we have, because we've got a bunch, and this is so exciting to me. Is Missy Bell here? She's not here, but Sarah, you're a part of this group. Hearts for Prayer meets on Tuesdays from 6 to 8. They're going to be meeting here at our building starting September 24th. And they're going to be studying a video teaching called The Battle Plan for Prayer. So in addition to interceding for our community like they always do, they're going to be doing some digging, and they provide snacks. Jason and Kim Bennett. I know Kim is here. Jason's traveling. Kim is here. Starting on October, their group is going to be called Dynamic Marriage. Jason and Kim have been certified instructors for this program. It's an excellent marriage building program. They're going to start October 6th on Sunday nights. They're going to meet here at our building. They have room for 12 couples. Now, here's something that's important for you to know. This is a curriculum-based teaching. It's investing life into your marriage, and there's a cost. The cost is $130 per couple. I know that's a lot of money, but one of the reasons why we believe in charging for this is because if you pay $130 for the curriculum, you are more likely to do the work. Can I just be honest with you? So it's worth it. Don't just say, I won't do it because it costs money. It's worth it if you want to invest in your marriage. They have room for 12 couples, and you can bring snacks and drinks of your own. And then a little differently, but also very cool, Brian and Amy Brackey, right back here, waving with a baby. Awesome. Not your baby. All right. I'm really excited about this. Amy and Brian are starting a group for blended families. Blended families. And they're going to be meeting every other Wednesday starting September 18th. And they are also going to be using a curriculum, but how cool is this? Brian and Amy have purchased the curriculum as a gift to anybody who joins their group. Okay? And so that is there for you. They have room for eight people or 8 couples? 8 people, right? Okay? And eight, individuals. You can be married into a blended family. You can be a kid of a blended family. Whatever it is for you, you are welcome into that group. So I'm excited about that. Kita, right back here. She's a leader of our West of 60s group. West of 60s is for anybody who is 60 or west of it, or if your spouse is west of 60, okay? So I drag my wife along, who is not 60 yet. She's catching up. West of 60s meets once a month, and they're going to start October 20th. Their meeting places vary, but they're going to have a good time. First meeting is a scavenger hunt, right, Kita? Going to be a lot of fun. And then the last group that will start up next Sunday is my Weight Watchers group. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus, but we just meet at noon for 30 minutes right after our morning gathering. So we'll be back on track next week. Now, here's the deal. If you have been a part of a group in the past, we wiped all of the groups out. All of the groups have 0 members at this point. And Kita contacted me last night, and she's like, they took all my members out of my group. Okay, we need you to sign up again. So even if you've been in a group in the past, you can sign up again. Leaders, if your group members, if you want to put your people back in your group, you have the power to do that, okay? So that's fine for you to do. But listen, I want you to sign up today. What's going to happen is once you sign up, your group leader will contact you with all the details. They will give you the address. They'll share phone numbers with you. They'll get you all the details. That information is not in the app, but your leader will contact you with all the information. And I'm very excited because I believe growth happens best in groups. That's my closing statement. I would love it if you repeated it with me. Growth happens best in groups. So sign up now. God bless you. Have a great Sunday. We'll see you next week. We're launching the Jesus Way next week.